writers Dr Joe Kearney and PJ Cunningham are compiling a book entitled From the Candy Store to the Galtymore. Now, they would like your input. Now, they're gathering first-hand memories and stories of the Irish showband scene in the UK from the 1950s to the 1980s. Now, if you have an interesting spin on visits to the Galty, the Bamba, the 32 Club, the Gresham, the Harp, the Hibernian, the National, or other dance halls, contact the writers. Information is on our website, or have a pen and paper ready for details at the end of my chat with Dr Joe Kearney, who I'm pleased to welcome on the programme. Joe, great to speak to you.
Jerry, delighted I have an opportunity to speak to yourself and to your listeners.
Hey, Joe, now your project has attracted a lot of interest and media coverage, resulting in some excellent contributions. Whilst you're delighted to hear from and will acknowledge everyone in particular, rather than just the lowdown on favourite bands, people remember seeing the stories of love and loss, rows and ructions, fun and games are the ones that you're after.
That's right, exactly that, because what actually happened, we produced a collection of stories last year that was relative to the rural electrification scheme, the rollout of that in Ireland, which happened, commenced in 1947. But during the course of collecting those stories, we started to hear lots of tales of when electricity came into dance halls and parochial halls around Ireland. And the great excitement there was when somebody plugged in an amplifier and then plugged in an electric guitar, and suddenly there was a switch from the conventional dance bands and ceilidh bands to the show band era. Literally was born with the arrival of electricity, rural electrification. And I then thought about my own time. I would have attended the dance halls and parochial halls in rural Kilkenny in the late 1960s, and from there I moved to London. I always remember it was remarkable. I walked out of the door of the Mayfair Ballroom in Kilkenny and walked in through the door of the Galtymore, and it was like as if it was a seamless switch. It was this wonderful experience of literally being immersed back in the culture that I was familiar with, and the people and the accents and the music. And when we came up with the notion of collecting these stories, we thought that we would have a selection from Ireland itself, and then this remarkable experience that there was for the Irish community in Britain at the time. I think what happens is, and the reason that this became such an exciting and memorable experience for people, the whole show band era, was because you had that cultural switchover. You had we were emerging from that more formal sort of dance band type of dance experience to this liberated, wonderful, energetic sounds that were coming from across the Atlantic and they were coming from across the Irish Sea, and that merged into this wonderful show band experience.
Indeed. Now, dances were an important in the fabric, actually, I think, of society. Now, you experienced that firsthand, as you said. Now, the escapism and the thrill of a night out for those working hard and maybe living in poor accommodation in cities like London, Birmingham, Liverpool, Manchester and elsewhere can't be underestimated.
No, you're absolutely right about that, because when we think of the phenomenal benefit that occurred in Ireland as a result of the money that was sent back, from hard-working immigrants that sent. I mean, there's figures put on it some time ago that it's close to 6 billion that came back to Ireland in the space of about 3 decades, if you factor it in for inflation. And you think what you said is absolutely right. Hard-working individuals, they needed their relaxation. The relaxation came in many times in the dance halls with the Irish bands, and those Irish bands that went over to Britain, probably they went over during the Lent period to start off with, when the whole notion of dancing in Ireland was frowned upon by many of the priests and the clergy. So this is where the opportunities cropped up to actually service an audience and bring a culture to people that literally were crying out for it and that welcomed it with open arms.
Indeed. Now, you grew up in Kilkenny yourself, as you mentioned.
I did, that's right. And I mean, I experienced these great nights when, you'd live for the dance on maybe a Sunday night. Sunday was the important nights at that stage when I was sort of growing up. Saturday night was considered a little bit more sacred. So Sunday nights, and of course throughout the week that was the highlight. You thought about this, you dreamt about it, and of course that cultural switch was starting to occur in Ireland. And as men's hair grew a little bit longer towards the collar, the hems of miniskirts sort of came up a little bit, and the smell of Brill cream and Old Spice and hairspray it'd knock you in the dance hall. And I mean, it's a massively nostalgic thing when you think back on it. And there are wonderful stories that are emerging from that particular period, because we had a cultural there was a whole sort of nuanced thing where, the men were on one side of the dance hall floor and the ladies were on the other side of the dance hall floor. And, when the three songs, the set stopped and the band said, "Your next dance, please," you were eyeing up your next potential dance partner across that big floor that could be as wide as the Gobi Desert. And underneath the glitter ball, you headed across the minute that the music started up and hoped that you would be able to ask out your selected partner, but of course many times that didn't happen. You had to make a quick adjustment.
Indeed.
Across the floor.
Now your digs in Kilburn and Cricklewood were a far cry from where you were reared.
They were, that's right. But again, that was what was wonderful about it, was the fact that there was a community spirit. I was the classic thing. I spent about 3 years working with in the construction business, which was just literally working for subcontractors and digging trenches, pick and shovel man. So yeah, the Crown was a great place, and just wander up the road from the Crown and into the Galtymore, and it was just great. We lived for it. It was absolutely wonderful, and one of the things that in many respects kept us sane, the fact that we would, and of course it was great as well. There was a sort of a control mechanism, because the bouncers on the Galtymore wouldn't tolerate anybody coming in there that was a little bit worse for wear. So it was probably a moderating influence. You had to make sure that you kept yourself straight to get in the door, at least at the Galtymore. But I do remember the queues and the crowds of people that flocked to the bands that were there at the time, the Larry Cunninghams and the Miami and the Royal, and those big names that came over there, and they've got marvellous. Really, the nights that we spent there were just phenomenal.
Indeed. Now, giving you lifeline to those like your good self was Michael Byrne of the Galtymore, one of the first sponsors actually of our station, the Irish Spectrum, until its closure in 2008. Now, we know well of its popularity. Now, many listeners fondly tell me of the heyday of the dance halls with the Irish bands was a great time, as you say, offering freedom and excitement. Now, as your colleague PJ said, the new musical genre represented a shift away from the more formal ceilidhs, as you mentioned. Yet there was the security blanket of socialising with, as you mentioned earlier, with people from home.
Yes, I think that was the wonderful thing. And again, you had the choices in the Galtymore. You could have gone into the backfield, which was where the ceilidh music was in full swing there. But we were inclined to gravitate towards the show bands. But again, you're talking about you're dancing with the girls from perhaps your own neck of the woods that understood your culture, and really it was a home from home. And I mean, there was opportunities if you needed to change accommodation. You probably would bump into somebody who would tell you where there was gigs going. If you needed to change employer, you could find out where the work was going at the time. It was a hugely social, absolutely hugely social environment.
Indeed. Now, yeah, I know you're sensitive to the fact that everyone has their own valuable memories, but for the purposes of making the book's content rich and varied, rather than people leaving it at the thrill of seeing their favourite acts such as Big Tom, Joe Dolan, the Miami, or whoever it was, you're seeking out tales of chance meetings, funny and touching anecdotes. Can you share one that's actually you've heard that struck a chord?
I think there was a fabulous story that I got, and it is in relation to travel as well. There was a gentleman who contacted me. He's from Belfast, and he described one evening in Belfast. He said Friday evening was a marvellous evening because they'd have the New Musical Express and the Irish magazine, the Spotlight magazine, would come out, and they'd see where all the bands were playing, and they followed the bands in Belfast, loved the Royal Show Band. And they were sitting down having a pint on a Friday evening, wondering where were they going to go later on, and they discovered that the Royal Show Band were playing in Letterkenny in County Donegal. They'd hardly been outside of Belfast themselves. They're just young lads at this stage. But one of them had a car. They put some petrol in it and they headed out. But it turned out to be an exceptionally foggy night. And they worked out that, perhaps it would take them about 3 hours to get to Letterkenny, but that would be okay. They'd still be in time for the dance. As the car is proceeding along, about a couple of hours into their journey, they think that the engine is beginning to fail because they just literally cannot get any sort of traction at all, and they're going up the gears and nothing is really happening very well. They figure they're going to have to abandon the vehicle on the side of the road, middle of nowhere, fog all around them. They can see nothing, and suddenly a miracle occurs. The car begins to accelerate and get speed back again, and they're delighted with themselves. Of course, what they didn't realise, they'd actually crossed over the Glenshane Pass, and so they were climbing continuously in the car, not realising that they were actually climbing over literally a mountain range at that stage to drop down on the far side to get to Letterkenny. But they had a wonderful night in Letterkenny, met a few girls, and they got back into the car, but the fog was still there. One of them they now realise they have to cross this ridge, and so one of them gets out of the car and he waves his lit cigarette in front of the driver as he walks along the road to actually show where the road is and where the ditch begins. They got home at about 7 o'clock in the morning, and the milkman is doing his rounds. They buy 3 bottles of milk from the milkman, and they've had the most wonderful time. And I think there's an innocence in that story, but it shows the lengths that people would do to travel to go to their favourite bands.
Indeed, doesn't it just? I actually know the Glenshane Pass well, a truly horrendous place in bad weather. Now,